Greetings to my fellow plant nerds. It's Rachel. I am taking advantage of a very brief break in the rain we've been having incessantly for the last couple of days to give an update on an experiment that I have been trying in these two beds to take advantage of this crazy spring in July weather. Instead of my usual two plantings of spring and fall cool season crops, I am attempting a third planting in the middle of July. I don't know whether you'd call this an extension of spring or a pull ahead of fall, but I am really glad that it's working so far. And I needed to do it for a couple of reasons, so I'm glad I could. First, we had really bad weather this spring for getting the spring garden started. If you remember from my earlier videos, you want temperatures of roughly 60 degrees Fahrenheit to 75 degrees Fahrenheit to get good germination on things that we think of as cool weather spring or fall crops. That's soil temperature. The soil is like a cast iron skillet. It heats up slowly and then it cools down slowly. When you have air temperatures that are not in the right range for an extended period of time, it just takes a long time for the soil to heat up. In our case, I'll show you a graph here of our April weather. We came out of a really cold March, and right when things started like they might be warming up, we had these repetitive storms that brought in a ton of water, which cools down the soil. We got cold water landing on it, and then several days of cold temperatures right after the rain, which really further didn't help. And every time we started getting warm again, we had another storm. That pattern went through the end of April, and then I'll show you here into the early part of May. I started getting hopeful in the middle of May. Things are looking up, temperatures are rising, it was good. And we got hit with another one at the end of May. By then the seeds had germinated and they were growing, but it just was pokey. It was not a good yield. And by the time they started to grow, June comes in and adds insult to injury with a sustained stretch of dry, hot weather. Those plants went through two things. First, the dry soil, it baked in the sun and it dried out and it got hot. That can stimulate bolting in plants. They also can stimulate bolting if they go through stress. And in my garden's case, the plants went through near drowning experience to a sudden, basically a drought. That shocked them and didn't help matters at all. We were seeing bolting, we were getting bitter tasting leaves, and I was frustrated with the overall quality of the garden. We also had really poor floret sets on the broccoli, the cauliflower in the garden. That weather impact was magnified by what I planted. I put in retrospect, way too much cabbage. Our family can eat maybe 2 heads worth of cabbage, harvesting off a few leaves every week. I put in way more than that, and I shouldn't have. The other problem was, the broccoli and the cauliflower, because they weren't setting florets, it was a huge waste of garden space. And I knew they took up a lot of space, and I was willing to take the risk. But with the really lousy yield on those plants, I was regretting putting in as many as I did. There was hope. In the forecast, right when we were about to leave on vacation, I saw that we were about to get a stretch of cooler weather with heavy storms. So yet another spring storm in the middle of the summer. But this time I took advantage of it, and I'll show you the process here I shot right before we left. I went through, I cleaned out all of the bolted lettuces. I will say we had a little gem butterhead lettuce that held up shockingly well. So shout out to little gem butterhead lettuce if you are looking for a bolt resistant option. I also took the opportunity to clean out the cabbage that was taking up too much space. For the broccoli, I cleaned out the lower leaves close to the soil. Part of this is I'm just like a hopeless optimist, and I thought, maybe we could still get some florets. So I didn't take it out completely. I had another reason for keeping it, which is shade. I sprinkled down kale seed and I covered it with worm castings to support germination, patted it in place, and left it to get watered by the rainstorms. The broccoli helped to shield that from the sun because I knew it was going to get hot again while we were out of town. Also, when those heavy storms came through, it helped break up the rainfall a bit so it didn't hit the soil and wash away the seeds. You can see here I took this footage when we got back from vacation, and it worked. I did get baby kale plants. I'm excited about that. And it's a much, much better use of the space. With any experiment, I do recommend starting small, and I started with just this bed. But this bed was having the same problems, and the forecast showed, again, yet another round of storms, these ones that we're going through right now. I thought if this bed worked, this bed should too. Slightly different approach in this one. I'll show you some footage here of kind of more of a close-up on this bed. As I was harvesting the kale and the chard, it was clear they were really struggling with all the shade from this cauliflower that was in here, and at this point, I I saw how few florets I got from the broccoli, and instead of leaving the cauliflower to create shade, I just wiped it all out. I left the kale and the chard in the bed. Those are kind of sprinkled throughout. My hope is that they will rebound now that they have full sunlight coming in there through this insect netting, and grow out to form a canopy of their own to help protect the soil the same way that broccoli did in this bed. So we'll see. That part's kind of a new experiment. I don't know if the kale and the chard will do as good of a job. We will find out. I did take more footage of the planting process on this one because I forgot to shoot it on the first part of the experiment. You can see I do leave the roots in the soil to decompose, and I recommend doing that. Don't yank the whole plant out. Cut it off at the base, and then that becomes organic matter in the soil. Followed that approach here. I went through with a little hand trowel, roughed up the surface, kind of leveled it out a bit, sprinkled down kale and chard seed, and covered it again with worm castings and coconut coir, patted it in place, and these storms are doing a great job of watering it in. I picked kale and chard for a reason for this experiment. They do need cooler temperatures to germinate, ideally, but once they're going, they are a lot more bolt resistant than arugula, spinach, lettuce. They're a really good use of the space. I get repeat harvests off of them. They're a really nice dark leafy green, and I'm supposed to eat a lot of that because I'm on the Walls protocol. They're a much, much, much better use of the space for me than the cauliflower, the broccoli, and the cabbage that were in there before. That's it for now because it is starting to rain again. I do recommend this experiment. Try and take advantage of the lousy weather when it happens. It's not great news for the tomatoes back over there. They're ripening very slowly, but I figured I might as well make something out of this, and so I am quite happy with the experiment so far. I will give updates throughout the growing season if there's any loss of quality, taste, texture, any problems. I'll be transparent about it. So far I'm happy, and I'm optimistic about how it's going. You can see this insane watermelon behind me. That blew up while we were on vacation, and I've just been kind of throwing it up over the trellis because you don't want to prune in wet conditions. But if I can get even one dry day, I am going to need to prune that thing. I will film that, and if anybody's interested in how to prune a watermelon, it is very different than how you prune a cucumber or a squash or any of the other members of that family. Personally, I find it really interesting. I'm going to give it a shot, and I will try and get a good video for you guys if that is of interest. If everybody else is having weird weather, my sympathies, my empathy, and make the best of it. Play around and see if you can find the silver lining on the situation. Thank you. Hope it was useful. Appreciate you watching. Thanks.